from the Ethereum Foundation, Nick Dodson from Fuel Labs, and our moderator, Paul Lansky from DAppNode. Paul, you'll sit in the middle, Nick in the right. Perfect. And like all our other debates, we'll vote here at the outset of this debate. So be it resolved, Ethereum should maximize throughput despite higher hardware costs and centralization. We'll give you a few minutes to vote here. You can scan the QR code.
Can we vote as well?
Sure. Which category do you vote in, Paul?
Honestly, I have to mention it right from the start. I might be not the most impartial moderator on this debate. I run a project that does open source software and operating system for home stakers to run nodes called DAppNode. And of course, I am biased towards favoring nodes to be able to be run on a home setting. So lower specs for me is the way to go on this way. That said, I have the utmost respect for Tony, for Nick, and I'm going to try to be as impartial as possible. And I have prepared some really spicy questions on both sides. So
perfect. Okay. Be it resolved, Ethereum should maximize throughput despite higher hardware costs and centralization. We have 6 in the agree category, 21 in the disagree category, and 7 in the abstain.
Right on, let's get this party started. Larger Blockspace versus lower specs device compatibility. Okay, this is a fundamental discussion on the trade-offs of blockchain development, but it does not end at a technical requirement or technical discussion. It hits directly at the heart of the social layer about who do you decide to include on your validation and who do you decide to leave out of your node operator set. And this has serious implications with the downstream properties of the entire system. In other words, the trade-offs are real and go beyond the price of the hardware that you need in order to run a node. It tackles on chain performance, which is a quantifiable metric, but it also spirals quickly onto censorship resistance, desirable properties of decentralization and blockchains, and it gets wild pretty damn fast. For whoever is not fully convinced that this debate is one of the most crucial that we must have, let me remind you a little bit of blockchain history. Remember 2015, 2017, Bitcoin block size wars, an absolute civil war in the blockchain, in the Bitcoin community that ended up with the worst possible outcome, a hard fork that resulted on Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin. This is a debate for the ages, guys. And on one side, we have Tony from the EF arguing on 4 larger block space, and Nick from Fuel Labs arguing on lower spec device compatibility. Let it be resolved today whether Ethereum should optimize for maximum throughput even at the cost of higher hardware requirements and possible validator centralization. Vote for or against. We're going to have speakers having their initial remarks, 5 minutes each. I'm going to be quite strict with the timing, and we're going to let Tony start. 5 minutes for your initial remarks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, my name is Tony. I'm working at the EF. It's kind of funny that you mentioned the Bitcoin block size war, because that was exactly how I got very deep into the whole topic of crypto. So I was also around in 17. I was by the time on the small blocker side and was arguing very heavily on the Reddit forums by the time. At some point I got censored, so I got just kicked out of the Bitcoin subreddit because maybe my takes were too spicy to argue for the smaller blocks by the time. And then I shifted towards Ethereum, and since then I'm in the Ethereum ecosystem. And when it comes to larger block space versus low spec device compatibility, of course, we might all agree that we want both, right? We want the best would be we have large blocks and still being able to run it from a low hardware requirement device. Of course, there is some sweet spot in between, and we can never get the best out of both worlds. And I'm very interested in where we landed today. I already saw that most of you are against the, let's call it the big blocks, right? So most of you are small blockers here, which is very interesting. There's definitely something there. And just to give you my perspective on very recent developments in Ethereum, all of you know we shipped 4844, ERP 4844, the blob transactions that already introduced quite a lot of new data that now lands on chain, all the new data. The cool thing is about 4844, we don't have to keep it forever, right? You can delete it after like 16 days. But this is not the case for history, right? History just grows as state is just growing and growing. Before we do something like state expiry, the state will just grow infinitely, and the same applies to history. So it's a very nuanced topic when we talk about how big we want blocks to be. And in the end, the limiting factor is the gas limit. So currently we are at 30 million gas limit. It was gradually increased over the time. But now, like for 3 years, there wasn't really. So since the merge, there wasn't really any optimization when it comes to could we actually increase the gas limit? Should we stay where we are? Should we even lower the gas limit, right? There wasn't a lot of discussions going on, and it really took off in the recent, let's say in the recent year, right? Where more and more people were like thinking, okay, hardware improved, so we might also be able to now improve the gas limit. And I think this kind of camp has some points there. So I would also say by now we should be able to increase the gas limit, make blocks slightly bigger. Not saying we should double it, but I think there's definitely room to make blocks a little bit bigger, just talking about the gas limit. But then it's also, of course, a question of other optimizations. For example, can we get the peer-to-peer traffic down, right? There is a lot of overhead when it comes to the P2P stuff, and a lot of optimizations that can be done, but haven't been done because core devs are just very busy people and focus on the newest shelling point. And then it becomes a very heated debate, right? Because oftentimes on Twitter with those character limitations, it's super hard to really get into the depths of that discussion, and I'm really looking forward to discuss that today. And yeah.
I'll start by saying I was also kicked out of the Bitcoin community. So we share some really interesting life experiences, let's put it that way. So yeah, I think this also hits actually where I started with Bitcoin specifically before, which was, initially I was doing a bunch of mining in my house, and I got very bored with doing mining because you just get bored of setting up graphics cards and all these other things. And that was like 2013, so it was pretty early. And so I started to want to build something on Bitcoin, and that actually led me to looking at their clients and looking at how it was made. And even then, I didn't know C++, but I knew it was a real shit job, quite frankly. It was like everything was all over the place, and it didn't work very well. It's like totally a community build, quite frankly, because it was not in a good spot when I came to it. And basically, I found one opcode in the Bitcoin set of opcodes that seemed useful to me, which was op return. And I wanted them to expand op return from whatever it was, like 40 bytes or something, to 1 megabyte, so I could put code in there and actually try to do something with it, right? Or at least witness things, right? So this is actually how I started with trying to build something on Bitcoin. And I had no knowledge of this Blockspace war thing or anything. I was totally naive. I just came to Bitcoin. I posted it. You could probably still find it. My handle on the Bitcoin forum was Silent Cicero. You could probably still look it up, like in the archives. And I posted this really dumb question, which was like, can we just expand this from this? Because then I could actually do something. And like the hatred that I got, like it was like I had said the unspoken thing in the forum, and that like immediately I must be like destroyed, you know? And some guy at the very end of the post was like, oh, like you should take a look at Ethereum. And I was like, oh, okay. And then my whole life shifted. Like literally after that one guy said that, I started looking into whatever Ethereum was. Now, when I was looking into this, I bet this was around like 2015. So I was still even a little late to the early days of Ethereum. But like, it was really how I started with things too. Now, mind you, I didn't know a lot back then. I didn't know what the ramifications would have been to expanding it. So, you know, I think that now I've obviously learned a little more about how all these things work. But for me, I guess, and looking at this debate and looking at, you know, the conversation, I think there's a few things that I do take really seriously or really personally with the way that blockchains work. So I got into blockchain because I wanted the world to be able to, and I mean like people, like everyone in this room, to be able to potentially or actually participate in the system. So actually propose new blocks, actually verify and, you know, secure the system. That's why I got into crypto in the first place. And the core reason is just because, you know, all the other systems we have in the world don't work that way. You know, Wall Street, everything else, they're not going to tell you shit. They'll tell you that like, yeah, the money's there, don't worry about it, you know, like it's fine. And it's very hard to get information and really transparently understand a system. So what I love about blockchains is that for the first time, like human beings have created sort of somewhat of a, you know, a system on the internet where things are a lot more transparent, but also we can progress the system together, right? We can progress each state change together, and we can all run different nodes. And even with Fuel, one thing that we launched recently was Fuel Ignition, right? Our layer 2. And Fuel Ignition's kind of interesting because our node requirements are like 2 cores. But if we were to use, if Ethereum didn't have the DA restriction, we could get with those 2 cores about 40,000 TPS as a rollup, because the CPU power that has happened over the past 10 years has increased significantly, and we can do crazy throughput on low spec devices, like really, really crazy. And if Ethereum can open up more DA, right, then we can use that and take that in and really do some damage with it. Fuel, also if you want to share some alpha, because just take the gloves off. Fuel is also building a sequencer and DA layer that's ZK native, that should have 1.5 gigabytes per second throughput. But it's because we shard the chain. And the spec for the devices is still low spec. So when you forget about the Ethereum baggage for a second, we will have a DA and sequencer chain that will be much higher throughput than what's available on the market on low spec devices, and that'll be proposed by low spec devices. So it is possible to achieve it. Now that being said, there's a debate here of, there are a lot of chains that just sort of YOLO the specs, and they're like, fuck it, 32 cores, give me 1 gigabit symmetric bandwidth, take the gloves off.
So
and
what you're saying
yes.
is that if Ethereum had bigger blocks, you could do more throughput. You're kind of arguing for his position.
So I am and I'm not. I'm arguing for the fact that, honestly, the physics of this will work in such a way that if I had more DA, I could do more throughput. And that's just a fact. I could have more secure throughput on Ethereum. And we all want that. We all want Ethereum to go and compete with all the high throughput chains. And even right now, on the current DA system, if I tweak Fuel enough, we can go to around 5,000 TPS with 13-byte transactions without going like overflowing the DA system on Ethereum. So if we honestly think we're going to fill up 5,000 TPS as a community right now, if you even think we have that kind of demand right now, like we can go and do that with Fuel today with low spec devices. Still low spec, still 2 cores, 8 gigs of RAM, nothing, right? But if you want to go higher and you want to go even further, so you want to get into the 10,000, 100,000 TPS range, right? Then Ethereum will have to consider expanding its DA layer. Now there's ways to do it that are like we take the gloves off and we increase the specs of the devices, and then there's ways to do it where you can retain low specs. And I think that even though there are different techniques, and for the purposes of the debate, I would say that we should argue for the high spec conversation because it's very important. All these Tendermint chains with high specs, they do the same thing. Sui, Solana, all these other chains, they're all high spec. So I think in representing them, we should do that. But I do think there is some techniques to get it to lower spec. But again, I just want to see Ethereum do crazy volume, compete as best as it can, and also retain its values. And I think that that's really important.
All right, so we've got on one side, we've got a bigger block size that would definitely increase throughput, would definitely increase the performance, would get us closer to what the Solanas and the Suis are kind of like bragging about.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that we can get that thanks to the roll-up-centric roadmap.
I would say that roll-ups give us a shot at, if you want a roll-up to get to Solana level volume, we can do that.
Without needing to increase the block size.
Right now, you would need to increase, if you want to get there, right like today, you would need to increase the amount of blobs that we have in 4844 a lot. You would need to increase that a lot. And that's actually what it comes down to right now. Unless you do sharding. So it's very nuanced. It's like, unless you actually do some kind of system where you can shard the data and different places in the chain protect different areas of the chain. If you don't do sharding that way, then you have to increase the specs and the bandwidth. And that's going to be, I think, the bigger conversation. So again, what's nice about the long format here is it's nuanced, like every fucking thing in blockchain. It's super, super nuanced. So at least you guys can get a sense of the physics of it. Yeah.
All right. So let's dig deep a little bit. Both of you mentioned new updates, new upgrades, new technical improvements that sort of allow to minimize the downsides of both your positions while maximizing the upsides. Can we discuss a little bit, Tony, can we discuss a little bit what's coming for Ethereum and why block size wouldn't be, if we increase the block size, it wouldn't be that much of a problem? Mm-hmm. What can we have?
Yeah, so first of all, right after the merge, PBS was launched, right? So Proposer Builder Separation, which was already a first very important step to separate the role of building a block and proposing a block. So all the agency that comes with proposing a block is still at the validator. So me as a validator with having only, let's say, one validator, I will always have the full agency over my block. So if I want to put something into my block, I can put it into. If I want to outsource my block building, I can go and use Math Boost. This is the software that's by now, I would say, almost at the core of Ethereum, right? Because 90% of all validators nowadays use Math Boost, which means they outsource this power of building blocks to professional builders. And why did we do so? Because of MEV, right? MEV just became more and more of a problem. It led to more and more sophistication. If we wouldn't have done it, probably we would end up in a very, very centralized validator set, which is the worst case of all, because what is left after the small validators are gone, right? And then it's like, okay, we have PBS, we can now outsource this block building. This comes, of course, with other problems. You might have heard that Ethereum is very censored or can be censored quite easily by a few entities, currently 2 builders dominating the whole market. This means 10% are still building their blocks on their own machines, while 90% is already outsourcing it. And the cool thing about the outsourcing part is you can first make money, right? You can participate in the whole MEV game, and you get some money from the proposer, which means my small validator I would not have to come up with some fancy algorithms. that would allow me to, in the end, also extract some MEV. I can just outsource that to the builder, trust the builder, and be like, please give me the same block that Lido also gets, for example. Then, of course, this is not the end of the whole story, because 4844, EIP 4844, the blob transaction is just the first step into this new era of sharding. And what's coming next is, for example, PeerDAS. PeerDAS is a protocol change that will not go into the next fork, or very likely not go into the next fork, but the second next. And what PeerDAS does is kind of we leave this situation where we are right now, where we are basically scaling with the hardware requirements, right? Very linearly. So we can kind of throw more bandwidth or increase the bandwidth requirements for our validators, and in parallel scale proportionally to that. And this is of course very bad, because how would we ever get to, let's say, I don't know, millions of transactions that we might want, right? We want to at least attack the TradFi ecosystem and offer at least the same experience to users. And how could we ever do something like that when we are just scaling proportionally with our hardware? So this is kind of, yeah, I would say common sense that this will never gonna work. This would mean we would increase the gas limit like, let's say, 100x, and that would not work, right? Because we would hit so many different limits. Let it be computation, bandwidth, storage, right, with history and state. So that doesn't work. And now the goal is, okay, we do PeerDAS, which means low-end devices can just use data availability sampling to check if blobs are available. This means I can propose a block and ask, for example, my peers, are the blobs that are included, are they actually available? And this is one of the ideas that will be or can be shipped with PeerDAS. Of course, as long as it's not shipped, we cannot really enjoy the benefits of it. And we already see with 4844 the bandwidth requirement increased quite dramatically, so almost a megabyte of data per slot, which is quite a lot, because if you think the average block today is like 100 kilobytes, right? Pre-4844 it was like 110, 120 kilobytes, and now we are at, let's say, 90 kilobytes. That's the last time I looked it up. And we didn't get that for free. We added like almost a megabyte of blobs, and this is now, I would say, the main limit for validators. It's a lot, you just need a lot of bandwidth. And if you don't have the bandwidth, you might get the block of the previous proposer too late, which means you start building on your own block late, and in turn, you get your own block out late, and then you might be reorged out, right? Because you have to get your block out before second 4, and otherwise you will almost 100% sure you will be reorged. And yeah.
So just to try to get to what you're saying that we've basically already done it, not through block size, but through bandwidth. We're already pushing out the sort of like the home staker or the smaller operator due to other things that might have nothing to do with the block size, but they have an implication on whether small people can run nodes or not.
That's a good point, yeah, because you might argue we've already done it. We have done it, let's say, on the average case, right? But we are always prepared. So the largest possible block that you can build on Ethereum is if you compress it, because everything is snappy compressed in Ethereum in the networking layer. So the largest block you can build is 2.7 megabytes, right? So you could, since we had the 30 million gas, you could always build those really big blocks, right? 2.7 megabyte. It's basically a block full of call data, nothing else, right? And then you already pushing to the limits, right? Of course, we don't see those blocks. We saw them, we never saw such a big block, right? But we saw rather big blocks pre-EIP 4844 because rollups needed call data to post the data down to L1. But we didn't really, of course, yeah, if you then add it up, like the 2.7 megabytes plus 6 blobs, then of course I agree we have increased it, but only the average case, which is 3 blobs per block, we are still far away from what the EL payload would allow you. So the EL payload can be huge. Let's say, like I said, 2.7 megabytes, while the blobs have the constant size of 128 kilobytes, and every block is just 128 kilobytes. So nothing more, nothing less. A little less, actually, when you compress it, and it has a lot of zeros, but that's just some small detail.
So it might be good just to give people some numbers for context of, let's say Ethereum's primary competitor is Solana. Just, throwing it out there, right? Just might as well. So here's what I have to say on a few things here. One is that Solana's average TPS, non-voting, so forget about the voting, just what they're doing with their business right now of that chain, floats around 750 TPS, okay? And right now on Ethereum, fuel ignition can do 600, and we can tweak 2 settings and get it to 2,000 pretty quickly. Starkware just did 850, and Starkware is doing it with only posting the state diffs. So already, right now, before we go expanding node requirements, everything else, we're already doing the amount of throughput as Ethereum's top competitor right now. Now, Solana likes to throw up a lot of really big numbers in your face, but on real business like that they're doing right now, Ethereum is actually, just as of recently, extremely competitive in multiple areas of the stack. And if you take some of the EVM rollups even, and you just grind them right to the highest, amount of processing you can throw at them, factoring out state growth, which they're going to have to deal with, they still do 500 TPS. So we have to ask ourselves a question, right? Is the throughput that we do on Ethereum right now, is this going to be enough to compete versus trying to load up everything, increase the requirements on the base level right now? Even though we're already pretty competitive by numbers to Ethereum's biggest competitor right now on the rollup side. And then secondly, can this hold us enough until we can get to pure data availability sampling, such that even if we raise the bandwidth requirements and node requirements a little bit, it'd still be somewhat consumer, right? And we would be able to get the scale from the effectively sharding. It's effectively like a data sharding kind of situation. And can we actually do that? And my answer to this, in defense of low node requirements, is absolutely. I think that right now, Ethereum, even with its quite frankly, broken voting system that it has, right, for consensus, we spend so much of our bandwidth and data on just votes, right? And even Vitalik was saying that if we drop that whole thing down to 10,000, right, voters instead of a million or whatever we're at for the full epochs, that would already give us so much more room. And my hunch to this whole thing is that if I can tell you right now, on transfers, I can give you 5,000 TPS on Ethereum today. If I put some devs on it, moved around some resources with fuel, I can give you 5,000 TPS with BLS alone, no ZK, okay? That's in an optimistic setting. With ZK, if Starkware changes some things and goes to their native prover, et cetera, maybe they get to 1,000 to 2,000 TPS on non-transfers, right, which is pretty good. So Ethereum actually has way more than it's selling itself as. And I think the big problem with Ethereum is actually not going to be the block size, and it's not going to be these things. They're very important. Ethereum's problem is just marketing. It fucking sucks at marketing.
That's a very good point.
We literally have the amount of throughput that Solana has right now. And yes, it's at stage 0 rollups. Both Starkware and Fuel Ignition are at stage 0, and we should get them to stage 1 or 2 as soon as we can. But literally, we're already doing the throughput right now that would be the top competition. It would beat the top competition right now. And so the thing is, we can add more data. We certainly can, and I'd love to have more data to work with. Fuel is working on a client that does 1.5 million TPS in terms of throughput. It takes 64 cores, and it's not the greatest thing ever, but we have that too, because it's just more CPU cores and more RAM. So whatever, it's not a big deal. The point is just to say that I'd like to see Ethereum get to 1 million TPS, for sure. But I don't want Ethereum to sacrifice its values because that's the only thing it's got going for it. The only differentiator that Ethereum has versus Solana is that Ethereum is actually decentralized in a way where people can still participate in proposing that Solana just will never have because of the way that they've structured things. And I think that if we are to be honest about ourselves, that we should try to retain those values because that's the marketing pitch. Now we do a shit job at marketing this, and the entire world is wondering what's the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, these other things. But I would argue again, computers have come a long way. Even consumer computers have come a long way in the past like 4 years. I'm not even joking. It's like just even the M chip series is crazy.
Right. Wait a second.
Yes.
You mentioned the values. You mentioned decentralization,
That's right, yeah.
Decentralization. So decentralization is kind of like a gradient where different properties emerge, different properties that we might find desirable or not, right? Amongst them, resilience against like power outages, against government capture, against regulatory interference, whatever. But like humans are also like notoriously terrible at estimating tail risks. It's basically if the probability is small enough, our brains just think that's not going to happen.
Yep.
So it is very hard to put these values of like, yes, but we are preparing for something that has a 0.000 something a chance of actually happening.
Right.
But then again, crises do happen. What about the subprime crisis in 2008? What about, and like even like wild supply chain attacks like the SSH vulnerability, like the Lebanese pagers, like extremely highly complex attacks, even on Ethereum, can happen if they happen in pagers in Lebanon, for example.
Yeah.
So why is this value, why are these decentralization values so important then?
Okay, so I want to let you also answer too, so I'll try to be as quick as I can. What I'll say is this. I will say that people keep trying to gaslight you into thinking that we're preparing for World War III. We are not preparing for World War III. There is no internet service that is ready for World War III. That is bullshit. That's not what we're preparing for. And whoever says that is stupid. This is not a bunker like preparing situation. What it is something a little different. Ethereum's only marketing pitch to the world is that it might be a fair and transparent system to do things on that is somewhat proposed by a wide group of people. This has wide-ranging implications for its marketability as a product to human beings. What it means is that if you build something on this thing, if there is some government, and I don't mean the United States, if we crossed the United States, they would shut Ethereum down in 1 day. They could shut the entire thing down because they literally have a military power that's so great, it's so vast, it would shut it all down in a day. We're not talking about the United States. We're talking about every other country on planet Earth that has a government or a system or financial system, et cetera, that is somewhat not fair, somewhat not accessible. And when you have enough decentralization in your system and you build things with it, for all of those people, not Americans, everyone else, they might have a fair playing field to work with using Ethereum as their base system. And when you run everything in server rooms, like absolutely everything, including all the proposing, it is so easy for even a country to send that server farm, or whatever it is, a cease and desist letter. And that server farm's not going to want to cross a country, like a whole country. It's not going to want to do it. So we have a better shot at decentralization when people can do these things at home, because it just provides such a mess for these other governments to work with that it gives Ethereum some value and product in the market of technology that happens on the internet. So my argument again is this is why home staking and everything else is so important, and home proposing. Yeah.
We got decentralization. Why is it important?
Yeah.
Why it makes Ethereum, like you made a really good case for the marketability. Maybe we should like be marketing it for this. This is like a fair and transparent that anybody, systems that anybody can access.
It's the only one.
How like why would we want to compromise that with bigger blogs and like pushing out this ability of people running it at home?
Right, so decentralization is definitely, so I totally agree, and you put it very well, the most important value that Ethereum basically has. And one of the reasons is censorship resistance, right? We need, for example, if 90% of all blocks are censored by the builders, then we might want to have something like inclusion lists to allow proposers, which is in the end a small end device, to specify certain transactions that must go on chain. So kind of we want to limit the room of possibilities for builders and force them to include certain transactions. And if they don't want to include those transactions, then they just have to stop building for those 12 seconds, right? So this is one of the very important things why decentralization is so important. And another thing would be how would we ever recover from a 51% attack, right? We had the Bitcoin example. You said it was a very bad outcome, I agree. But there was also something very beautiful to the whole Bitcoin thing, because by the time there was this New York agreement, right, where all the miners, I think 90% of the hash rate, met in New York, and they basically agreed on the Bitcoin roadmap. And then there was this guy who was basically saying, hey, that's not how Bitcoin works, because I'm also running a node and I will fork away. Even if you have 90% of the hash rate, my node will not stay on your chain. And then more and more users adopted it, and in the end, this guy won, right? We didn't get the 2x increase, the block increase for Bitcoin. It only SegWit, right? Then you had Craig Wright and those other guys splitting off. But in the end, it was really the users, the people that ran the nodes signaled, I will not follow your chain if you increase the block size by 2x. And that's exactly what happened. So it was, even though 90% of the hash rate agreed on a roadmap on, let's say, the 2x block increase, the nodes signaled, we will not follow your chain. You, with your 90% of hash rate, you will build on a chain, but we won't call it Bitcoin. And it's exactly the same on Ethereum. So as long as we have solo stakers, there can be something detrimental happening. We can still be like, okay, there is a group of people, a group of aligned people that care about decentralization, censorship resistance, credible neutrality, and all those values that are super important within the Ethereum ecosystem. They can then still just fork away and rescue Ethereum. Of course, this is a very bad outcome, right? Because imagine the disputes going on in the community, not even talking about where is the real USDC, where are the stable coins, where are the DeFi apps and so on, right? This would be a super complicated outcome. But in the end, you could rescue Ethereum by just having basically one solo staker not doing what the big guys say and just continuing what he's doing. And the thing I said first with the censorship resistance, that's of course one of the most important properties of Ethereum, especially if we go all into this PBS roadmap. So if we say we are fine with PBS, with the proposer builder separation, then we move some of the power that is currently at the proposer, we move it to the builder, and then we want to constrain the builder to force him to include certain transactions. At the moment, it's Tornado Cash transactions, and if 90% of the builders censor Tornado Cash transactions, then every 10th block can include a Tornado Cash transaction, right? It's not a bad user experience for Tornado Cash in specific, but there are many apps out there that might basically die if the transactions can only be included within every 10th transaction. So yeah, to summarize, it's censorship resistance, credible neutrality, decentralization, and this is also what distinguishes us in Ethereum from Solana, right? Because of course, they have a great marketing and everything, and all the meme coin trading is happening there. They might have done a great job in doing that, but then it's debatable what actually matters here, right? Is it really having thousands of TPS when trading meme coins, or do we in the end care much more about getting certain transactions that a state says, we don't like that, still getting them on chain?
Thank you for that. We're going to go on to the Q&A section right now. I don't know if there's a microphone floating around. Yeah, there's a box. And a microphone as well.
Hello. I took some notes while you were debating, and I'm going to take the super low block, low spec device maximalism position. So excuse me for what I'm about to say because it might be offensive. But like, for example, I met someone here from South Korea, and they told me that most nodes in Ethereum, and also, like, I think Solana anyways is hosted only like on Hetzner, from what I know, because basically the block propagation just doesn't work globally, despite what like their CEO says on podcasts and so on. I think he's just like saying random stuff. Anyways, but like one problem with block propagation globally is of course that there's like a delay when, let's say, a majority of the nodes are run in Europe and the US. And so what I've heard from this person from South Korea is that nobody's running nodes in South Korea in Ethereum because basically the network doesn't work there, right? Because potentially you get a lot of orphans and so on, so you can't just run it. But I think, I mean, this is just anecdotal, and you might have like a response to that somehow you can argue it away. But I'm, for example, a application builder, and I don't know how many dApps you've built, but as an application builder, we always try to build dApps as decentralized as possible, but then because of the, and this is why I was excusing myself, because of the selfish decisions that the research community makes on the consensus layer part, which by the way is now separated between consensus layer and execution layer, so I think there's already kind of like a class system. We always just like get forced into using centralized services and stuff like this. Like one such an example is the call data change from going from call data to blobs, where I think it's important to understand that data availability actually just means the data is retained on the node for some limited amount of time, and then the layer 2 actually settles the balances on the smart contract so that you can retrieve it. What this means, however, is that if I build an application, then now all of a sudden I have to not only replicate the Ethereum layer 1, which is already quite expensive, right? Like we're talking about 200-300 euros of server cost if you're just going for like a data center solution. I think it's more when you're running it on-premise yourself, right? Like I'm talking about an archive node, which is what you need to retrieve events, which also, by the way, is, I mean, it's very expensive, right? Yeah. And so, you know, then I think there's a lot of focus on like MEV and token trading and so on. But I think what people don't realize is that this is still just one use case of many, right? Like many people are storing all sorts of state on chain. And so, like, for example, on the L2 roadmap, there's also a lot of talk about like how we can make, on the super chain or whatever, we can make like tokens interoperable. But like, I don't think there are even bridges for NFTs yet. And if you issue like an NFT on an L2, we know that all of the security assumptions go out of the window, because L2s were originally meant as this like settlement layer that you enter and then you exit rather quickly again. So I think, and yeah, I could go on. I mean, Starknet is not compatible with most of the current wallet infrastructure and so on. Mm-hmm. But I just think, I think my core point here is that if we want people to be able to run these nodes, and I think we need to talk, we need to especially cater to like application developers. I mean, the low spec device compatibility is definitely like something that I think application developers need, but I think there are a lot of other nuanced points that we also have to consider, that like an application builder cannot deal with a lot of the complexity, and so it's very important to keep these systems, you know, accessible, so that like a startup, let's say, with like 2 or 3 people can actually like run these systems in a decentralized way, because otherwise I don't have to stress also about like running my app on the cloud or whatever, because
yeah. So let me summarize this very quickly. I think you mentioned a few points. I'm going to let them answer, but in order to try to capture the essence of what you're saying is that we talked a lot about decentralization and home stakers and about the validation side. But actually, one of the real use cases of people using and building on Ethereum and building apps is that they have to go through centralized services in order to provide users of their apps with the information that they need to get from the chain, because it's impossible for an app developer to run an archive node. It's extremely expensive to run an archive node themselves. It adds an extreme amount of overhead. So what you're arguing for is not only take into account the validation and the MEV and all these MEV pipelines and inclusion lists, but like, how can we provide services on top of Ethereum in a decentralized manner without having to rely on these centralized servers?
Yeah, and I would say, so a lot of the reason why fuel is very niche, I don't know if you've heard of it or not, like what we do, but one of the reasons why I built is because I have built a lot of applications on Ethereum before. That was what I was doing before. And the problem when you build applications is you start to see that the entire thing is bad, like the entire stack. Like everything's actually really shitty in a lot of ways. So when we built Fuel, the reason why we built it was also because if I can do a rollup on Ethereum, but keep the specs low, and you can. So we ran on a RockPi board, which is a $100 computer, an ETH2 node, an Ethereum execution node, and a Fuel node, and I can give you 5,000 TPS. And that also is a low spec environment, such that if you ran your own node with all of those nodes, you would basically be in for the bandwidth, and yes, you have to probably pay for some spec, and server is going to be worse. But the goal of Fuel is to give you that. And we support all the wallets natively already. So you use any wallet, Solana wallet, Ethereum wallet, whatever. The development tooling we have is to improve over the existing tool chain, but also to keep state low so that the node requirements can be low. So Ignition's whole idea is to retain a low spec requirement for this. And for infrastructure, it's also to keep the infrastructure cost low for both running rollups on Ethereum and for this stuff. So I don't want to pitch my own stuff, but I give a shit about all of that.
I just think your example with the low-powered device, I think it's kind of, it's not going in the right direction. I'm not running my site on a Raspberry Pi.
No, but
I don't care. Like I actually need, you know what? Like I need a really good like VPS actually to run this stuff. Mm-hmm. I think I'm more held back by like the complexity. Like if I have different, because like the L2 solution is really a gift from Ethereum researchers to Ethereum researchers by ignoring the dev developers and the users. Because like we're like yeah, fragmentation is fine, you know. Like wallets can deal with this mess, application developers can deal with it, and we're just gonna build more Uniswaps kind of to like bridge everything. And I'm like, I'm going crazy, right? Like,
let's give Tony.
Let's be realistic, right? What did users wanted to have for now 10 years almost? It's scalability. So users wanted scalability. Users ask their apps, can you scale it, right? I did Uniswap transfers, swaps for like $50. It was okay, right? Because it was a nice experience in those transactions, but is it really realistic to have like $50 for a Uniswap transfer? No, it will never be, right? Also sending $1 to a friend, it shouldn't cost $1, right? You know?
I agree. I agree. I think you definitely solved that problem, but I think if you did a table with all of the requirements that you had, like where like each requirement you could make a check mark. I think
but what is the problem for app developers? Because the only thing an app developer has to do is now, let's say a rollup, they just send blobs instead of call data, right? It's way simpler, it's way cheaper. Blobs by now are almost free. Of course, this will not be the same forever.
I think what he's referring to is like, in order to populate the UI with the data that the user wants to see, the apps need to get this information from somewhere. And the overhead to just provide this information is huge.
That is one aspect, but I think another aspect is the fragmentation. Like, for example, we send signatures to Optimism and we issue like NFTs on Optimism as well. But like we chose Optimism, right? But now there's Base, there's Arbitrum, and so on and so forth. And it's like, it's not as straightforward as you think to also allow people to
issuance. Yes, agreed.
Essence and other.
It's really bad.
I agree to that, yeah. I would totally agree to that, but 100%. That's a different discussion, right? That's the fragmentation discussion.
That's a later discussion. That's fragmentation. Yeah.
No, I mean, even the original sharding designs couldn't solve that fully, right? There was always this problem with, okay, we have many different shards, how can we let those shards communicate? And with the original sharding design, the L1 sharding, no one came to a conclusion like how can we actually do it.
So we're getting into one debate that's extremely important as well, which is the how layer 2s, how the roadmap centric, the rollup centric roadmap actually adds complication, adds fragmentation.
Has failed,
but that's
agreed.
a completely different debate, which is really interesting. And you can continue after this debate, because it is the time to now go into closing remarks from both of them. I'm going to give them 5 minutes to Tony, 5 minutes to Nick. You can use them to respond to that.
We
if
can
you want.
talk after.
Yeah. But
No,
yeah.
I think he has a very good point
Your
too.
pain is
right?
real, and you have a great point,
Yeah.
and you're absolutely right on a lot of things about how complex this is getting.
You know,
Completely agree.
Yeah, the
Yes.
pain, as you said, the pain is real, and
Yes.
now we are at the point, right, where users complain about the UX and the fragmentation, and this is now on highest priority on the research team, right?
Yeah.
What I oftentimes find difficult with is playing the kind of trying to pretend one party is now taking over a firm like EF Research or the researchers in general. That's in practice not the case, right? So my day-to-day work is like asking core devs, hey, how are you doing? How are the benchmarks doing? And then also asking dev developers, roll-ups, what can be done to improve your everyday life? And what they basically said was, yeah, please give us scalability. We want scalability without compromising on decentralization and censorship resistance. So that was basically what the broader Ethereum community said, yeah, that's very important for us. And of course, no one wants fragmentation, totally agree to you. No one wants a bad UX. You mentioned this Starknet example, right? And then it's about how do we actually get there. And I think the roll-up-centric roadmap, even though it lacks in a lot of things still, right? We are still at the very early stage of the roll-up-centric roadmap. I think there are already some very good attempts to improve on that. We might not just be there yet, right? But to be fair, the roll-up-centric roadmap is, I mean, the vision is older, but when did the first roll-up launch, right? Using blobs was, as of ERP 4844, probably like a year earlier, 2 years earlier. So I think it's just, we're still young. Of course, this is not a very satisfying answer that I can give you now, right? As a dev developer that might want to have a better user experience right now. But that's just how it works. If you built your app like 5 years before, then you would now complain about the fees. Now it's about the UX, and I can totally see that. I think we should put a lot of resources into that, really focus on how to now improve, how to keep scaling, right? We are still far away from allowing every dev developer to come up with crazy ideas that we cannot even think about, right? Because they are so far away because we are not scaling. But then it's about, okay, how to actually get there. And I think the roadmap, as Vitalik laid it out, with let's do ERP 4844, then let's go into peer data availability sampling until we arrive at full dank sharding. Then, okay, then we are at the end of the roadmap, how it's laid out, when it comes to scaling. And in parallel, we have to kind of also put in resources into how to solve fragmentation.
I want to use the last 2 minutes on like a last position on block size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, there are some EIPs out there. There is no single EIP that increases the gas limit because that's not possible, right? The core devs cannot increase the gas limit. If the users today decide we want to increase the gas limit, then they can do so, right? Not a single gas limit increase was triggered by the core devs, but always by the users. For blobs, it's a different story, right? Blobs don't work like that. For example, in the Pectra hard fork, which is the upcoming hard fork, there might be a blob increase. But core devs are in general very, very conservative when it comes to scaling, right? Especially with blobs. So what we see right now, there is a discussion of moving the target blob to 4 while keeping the maximum blobs at 6, right? A very conservative thing. Some push for increasing those limits. If you ask Base today, they are probably like, yeah, please push it to the limit as fast as possible. But Ethereum L1 is just not happy with sacrificing, let's say, a single solo staker, right? It's just not worth it. And we also talked very quickly about being reorged out and that kind of stuff. I totally agree, right? We already see today solo stakers are reorged more often than, let's say, Coinbase and Lido. But the thing is, it's not because one is a solo staker or one is a professional entity. The fact is really using MEV Boost versus not using MEV Boost. Because if you use MEV Boost as a solo staker, then it's actually not you as a solo staker propagating the block, but everything is done by the relay. So if I'm an Australian validator, which is kind of far away, right? We always use Australian, so no offense against Australian validators, I really like you. But if you're an Australian validator, your way to the main network is just way longer. And if you use MEV Boost, then the relay basically takes over the propagation, so you don't have to worry. And of course, we are still not there. We haven't shipped inclusion lists, so we shouldn't go all in builders and relays. But as soon as we have shipped inclusion lists, then I think it's maybe the community should start discussing what actually is a solo staker, right? Do we want the solo staker to build the blocks locally, or is it fine to outsource that? And I think that will be in the future a very spicy discussion that we will have to have. What is actually the value behind local building, and are we fine with kind of killing local building when we have censorship resistance?
A debate that I would love to participate into as well.
Yeah, so maybe just to say a few words on your point, because I think, again, you were just trying to highlight that the development experience and fragmentation right now is so bad that even if we go and solve these other more academic issues of throughput, that's only going to increase the throughput on the different chains and not fix these other development hurdles that are happening now. I'll tell you this, so I've been building on Ethereum almost since it started. I was probably one of the first people to use Solidity. And it has been a shit show the entire time. There has been no point of Ethereum's history where it was not painful to build on Ethereum. It's honestly, it's sad, because it could have been different. If the EF had taken over more parts of the build pipeline, not been so afraid of the regulators, et cetera, it would have been better, but you can't look back at history like that. It just was the way that it was, and it was messy. And so basically, we've always been in a situation where we've had bad dev experience. But Ethereum carries like a spirit to it that is quite interesting for what decentralization is on planet Earth, right? And Vitalik, is sort of a character in the sense that you can kind of look to someone like that to say, how would I want to guide a decentralized system through these different challenges and get some leadership, right? That being said, Ethereum is now in a position where a lot of the world is just like, I want to do business, and I don't care so much about this, right? The reality is that if you wanted to do business, the whole time you could have just run a server, or the whole time you could have just run a federated computing system. And quite frankly, if you're running everything on servers and you aren't really thinking about these problems, that's what you're doing. You're running a federated computing system. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. But that's not really how Ethereum ever came about. And it's not really what's represented in the values. Now you say Ethereum's hard to build with, and it is. And there's a lot of problems. There's data problems, there's propagation problems, there's proposer problems, all kinds of things. I think that half of it is social, in the social layer, trying to protect it. And the other half is just reality. Like, we just have to face whatever physics we have to face in order to get the decentralization system working. Ethereum is not well designed by networking engineers. It is designed by peer-to-peer people, contributors trying to build a peer-to-peer system. These are not the best networking people on planet Earth. They did not factor in the topology of the internet, how the internet is wired together, like all kinds of different challenges when it was constructed. It was just best effort, look at BitTorrent, look at Bitcoin, try to make your best shot, right? So a lot of designs in Ethereum are lagging significantly across every vertical, from propagation to all kinds of things. But if you're building on Ethereum, you're making a distinct choice that you're trying to make the world a different way. You're trying to push the world to go more into this way where like we want the neutrality, we want the fairness, we want the decentralization. And if you don't care about that shit, then just use what other option is around for your business and go get a good business. But what I would say is that like Ethereum's not really about that, at least for me. Ethereum carries like a spiritual torch for trying to always get to decentralization. And it's messy, and it's not fun, and we have a very messy like situation with the community and the researchers and the EF and everything else, and the whole process is quite messy. But that's part of its protection, is you actually have a lot of people to convince if you want to get things done. It's part of a safety measure, I would say, that Ethereum has that most communities don't. It makes it less competitive, but it's part of its protection. So if we want to fix these issues, there's a few different ways. We can have other teams go and build it, but still be friendly to Ethereum, and Fuel is very much in that category. We don't use the EVM. We have a completely different transaction system. We are building different kinds of DA and sequencing systems. We're building all kinds of other stuff. Only in the sense that I hope it will also guide Ethereum into doing these new kinds of things, or that Ethereum can leverage it, right? And what I would just say is that given what I'm seeing, both on the physics of computing and everything else, we have tons of room to reorganize our work to keep the same specs and have a much better system. We're just wasting a lot of time and energy on a lot of things that just like could be better designed, but we need the hands and the buy-in from all the different teams. So again, apologies on the dev experience. I'll say, since we've been building with this from the beginning, it's been horrible. And I built the first rollup, right, which is Fuel v1, and that's the only one that hit stage 2. And even when I constructed that, the whole thing was a mess. Like, even still, I couldn't use Solidity because I had to write my own sugar on top of Yule just to build Fuel v1 because Solidity didn't have call data copy when I was using it. And I just like can't believe all this shit is still not done, and it's like still not done, But anyway, I do think that because there's so many great teams working on Ethereum, and they're all building different things, Starkware, everyone, right, like Arbitrum, all these different teams are building different stuff. Ethereum, so long as we can believe in it, will be competitive on numbers. It just needs to fix its marketing, like get its shit together, fix fragmentation, some of the development issues, and basically get us back into this cohesive product for the user experience that is like at least somewhat scalable and decent. But I think we can get there. We have more than enough room on consumer spec devices. We need to make some changes, and I think like I'm really excited for what Ethereum brings to the table. So I'm long ETH, and fuck it, like let's go, and like fuck everybody else, like we'll do it. And I trust the people at the EF to try to make the right calls and not just like raise no requirements tomorrow. I don't think there's a lot of buy-in to do it, and like we'll get there. So yeah.
All right.
ETH to 10K.
So that was a super interesting debate. Huge round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you.
We started here talking about decentralization and the trade-offs, and we ended up talking about the trade-offs that the other side has, which is by trying to keep it low, by trying to keep it somehow pushing the scalability outside of the block size. We pushed it into rollups, into like third parties, private parties with different interests that are pulling all in different directions, and we have ended up with lots of fragmentation. So clearly what we have learned is that this is an extremely nuanced topic where scalability comes not only from block size. Block size could have solved or could still solve some of these problems at the cost of decentralization, but this is not a free choice, because what we're ending up with now is with fragmentation and kicking down the can or kicking up the can to the rollups has also caused a tremendous grief, especially to app developers. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your questions, especially you. And I think it's time to vote, right, John?
Yeah, let us vote. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Nick. And okay, at the outset of the debate, we had 4 in the agree category for be it resolved, Ethereum should maximize throughput despite higher hardware costs and centralization. We had 21 in the disagree category, 7 in the abstain. And I'll give it about 30 more seconds for the final vote. But it looks like we have not persuaded anyone. We have very similar results here. We have 5 in the agree category, 26 in the disagree category, and 4 in the abstain category. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for the lively discussion. Join us in 1 hour.